going on, everyone? James Van Evers here, and welcome back to another episode of the Political Freedom Fighters Podcast. Now, I know it's been a while since I did an interview with someone, but today I finally have a special guest with you. This is party number Libertarian Veterans Reform. This is I believe, the fourth person I've interviewed so far in this podcast. It's also, no, fifth person, I'm sorry, including Shaughnessy DeBerry, but my fourth political party member. This is the fourth political party that I have interviewed so far, and it is an honor to finally get into contact and getting ready to interview this person. I've been waiting to do this for a while. So with that being said, I want to introduce you all. This person is from the We the People Party of North Carolina, Mark Ortiz. How are you, sir?
Hi there, pretty good. My camera is sitting off to the side of me, but I'm looking at my computer screen. I have a computer with no built-in camera and no built-in microphone, and I like it that way. That way I can unplug the camera and microphone and know that they're not transmitting. That's why I'm not looking at you, but you can see me.
All right, that is awesome.
Hello, y'all.
All right, the first question is, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, my name is Mark Ortiz. I am the assistant treasurer of the currently inactive We the People Party. I was also its candidate last year for Rowan County, North Carolina County Commission. And the party is currently, we could say, mothballed. Our treasurer, Jeff Scott, has filed a statement of inactivity. And that means that until such time as we reactivate the party and try to get back on the ballot, we don't have to do financial reports. So it saves us some work. So that is the status of the party at the moment. I am currently 75 years old, collecting Social Security, although that doesn't fully cover my bills. I also have a small motorsports engineering consulting business here. I actually live in a metal shop building and have this chassis consulting business here where I help people with handling and suspension problems. Mostly on race cars, but not entirely on race cars. So I do that, and I also volunteer quite a lot with an organization called Down Home North Carolina these days. I don't get paid for that. So that is more or less who I am. Ideologically, I call myself a deconcentrationist. That means I fight concentration of power, concentration of wealth, and concentration camps.
Wow, that's actually pretty awesome. All that is pretty awesome.
Well, what would you like to know?
Oh yeah, right.
Future We.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Future of We the People Party, we don't know. Some people hold out hopes that Kennedy might run for president again. This party got itself on the ballot in the last election cycle thanks to a considerable infusion of funds from the Kennedy campaign. It was an easier way to get Kennedy on the ballot than having him go as an unaffiliated candidate. The Democrats actually challenged the whole thing on the basis that that was actually the entire reason for starting the party. That certainly wasn't the way we saw it. We wanted it to be something that would have ongoing ballot access, and if Kennedy merely had allowed his name to stay on the ballot, it's almost a certainty that he would have gotten 2%, and that would have kept the party on the ballot, and it would have been another alternative party vehicle for people to use to seek office. So that was certainly my hope for it. But unfortunately, Mr. Kennedy decided that even in North Carolina, he didn't want to stay on the ballot. It was kind of comedic the way the whole thing played out with the Board of Elections. When we were trying to get on the ballot, the Democrats didn't want us on the ballot, and the Republicans did. And then when Kennedy changed his mind and wanted to get removed from the ballot, they all flipped. The Democrats didn't want him off the ballot, and the Republicans did want him off the ballot. And it went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and they ruled in favor of allowing him to remove himself very belatedly. As it turned out, it didn't end up affecting the presidential outcome in North Carolina a bit, and it resulted in the party not getting ballot access for the next election cycle. So I advised against it at the time, and I still think it was a bad decision on Mr. Kennedy's part. But of course, it's hard to know for certain that it wouldn't have tipped the election. If North Carolina had tipped the presidential election, it would have been the first time in history the state has ever done that. Actually, if you look at the numbers, at how North Carolina has only gone Democratic one time since Carter, and that was 2008. And it went Democratic for Obama by the narrowest margin in the country. It was Obama's closest win. And at that time, if you look at the vote in North Carolina and compare it to the national popular vote, which gives you an indication of how North Carolina trends, how it leans with respect to the country as a whole. The North Carolina vote was 6.8 spread points more Republican than the national popular vote. And that was just enough to squeak it for Obama.
Wow.
Because he won the national popular vote by about 7.2%. And he won North Carolina by less than 0.5%. So that was 6.8% more Republican than the nation as a whole, even when it went Democratic. The next three elections, it was consistently, all three times, 6 points more Republican. And this time, it was only 1.5 points more Republican, which was a surprise. I wasn't expecting it to move that much. In other words, Trump, by the official numbers, which are not necessarily valid in this country, but they're what we've got. He won the national popular vote by about 1.5 points, and he won North Carolina by about 3. So that the state actually went more Democratic and than it had been. And that kind of surprised me after 3 elections where it didn't move at all. But it still went Republican by about 3 points. And so anyhow, and if it had gone Democratic, if just this one state had, obviously it would not have tipped the election anyhow. That's my defense of my position on that.
Wow. You not only did you answer what I was going to ask you about the history of the We the People Party of North Carolina, but you gave out a lot of info, so I actually really appreciate that. So why did? Oh, go ahead.
Nah, you go ahead.
Oh,
I
sorry.
didn't have anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. So why did you join the We the People Party of North Carolina, anyways?
Well, I got behind Kennedy only after he announced that he wanted to break with the Democratic Party and pursue his own candidacy. That was, I believe, October 9th of 2024, and no, 2023, the year before the election. And he was against the war in Ukraine, had a record as an environmental lawyer, and was polling double digits. So I was hoping that I could work with that campaign and get them to go alternative party rather than unaffiliated candidacy in North Carolina. And we would then have a vehicle where people like me could run for office. So that was why I did it. I didn't agree with Kennedy on Israel. I had not been supporting anybody, even Kennedy, in the Democratic nomination race, to the extent that there even was one. And so I basically took an interest in it starting early October of 2023 and went and saw Kennedy. Kennedy came to North Carolina and gave a speech in Charlotte only a few days after he had made that announcement. It was in the last half of October sometime. So I went down to Charlotte. I live in Kannapolis, North Carolina, which is northeast of Charlotte, up Highway 85. I'm about 20 miles from the closest point in Charlotte city limits and about 30 miles from the middle of Charlotte. So wasn't too big a trip. I took my bike down on the train, my bicycle, and rode the bicycle back. So anyhow,
That's awesome.
tried to get in touch with Kennedy. Tried to get in touch with Kennedy following that. Tried to get in touch with the lady who had introduced him. Trying to remember her name. First name was Rose, and anyway, it'll come to me. But she left the campaign very shortly after that. And so I could never get anybody in the campaign to answer an email or anything. And that went on until along about the turn of the year. And at that point, Kennedy made a decision to come to North Carolina and had an appearance and a speaking engagement in Raleigh, at which time he announced that he wanted to start the We the People Party. And personally, I think the name was a poor choice. It was partly because there is a rightist organization called We the People that has a presence in North Carolina and some other states that really is not aligned with what Kennedy was representing himself as standing for. And although it's not a violation of law because they're not a political party, it tends to create confusion. In fact, if you do a search for We the People organizations, there are just a ton of them. It's just astonishing how many organizations use that. So in a way that makes it more benign because you won't be confused with just one. Except this one I was referring to does have a presence on the ground in North Carolina. So I thought the name was a poor choice. If I were going to start a party, I think maybe I'd call it the Main Street Party.
Ooh,
I like that.
I like
Uh,
I like that too.
yeah, I had good campaign signs. Uh, they said Main Street, not Wall Street. I, I thought I had the best campaign signs. I didn't have a chance, of course. It was an interesting race for county commission. There were 2 seats up, and it's a strongly Republican county, and voting is at large, and candidate eligibility is at large, which is like most counties, but not all. Some of them have districts. There were 2 Republican incumbents. There was a Republican primary. 4 people entered the primary, but the 2 incumbents both won. And the Democrats only had 1 candidate. So it turned out I wasn't stealing any votes from the Democrat because anybody could vote for her and vote for me too. And interestingly, I found out later the Democrats had initially had a second candidate, but she withdrew. And I never even knew. I was just looking at the candidate lists at the State Board of Election, and I never saw a second candidate there. I don't know if she might have been listed sometime when I wasn't looking, but in any case, she had withdrawn. So that was how that came about. And so that was it. There was a Democrat, there was me, and there were the 2 Republican incumbents, one of whom was out of the country. He was deployed in Southwest Asia someplace we didn't even know where with the National Guard. The National Guard was out of the country fighting imperial wars when we got Helene. and one of our county commissioners was running for re-election, and he wasn't even around. He didn't have any signs out. He didn't campaign at all, was hardly able to, of course. And he got the most votes of anybody. The 2 Republicans just didn't campaign at all after the primary. They didn't go to any candidate forums. They didn't have much of anything, and they still won easily. The county is, by registration, about 43% Republican, 33% unaffiliated, 23% Democrat, and less than 1% other.
That's insane.
So that was my election. That was actually the 3rd time I'd run for office. The other 2 times were in 2004 and 2006, and I ran for U.S. House in the Democratic primaries. And I did it because I thought somebody should ask hard questions about 9/11 and about the ensuing wars that it was used to justify. And at that time, I was in the 6th congressional district, but only a third of a mile from the edge of the 8th. And interestingly, for every other office that you can run for in North Carolina, you have to live in the district, or as the statute puts it, you have to be eligible to vote in the election you're running in. But for U.S. House, that doesn't apply. You only have to be a resident of the state, and you can run in any district, which actually works out for the best because they move the districts around all the time. So anyway, I was living in the 6th, and at that time, the 6th was represented by Howard Coble. And Howard Coble was extremely popular. It was a safe Republican district. It was drawn that way. He was the Republican incumbent. I'm not sure if he served for 20 years or 30 years. He served a lot of terms. And he was, among other things, very good on constituent service. If you needed something from your congressman and you wrote to Howard Coble would respond. And that was part of the reason he didn't get primaried and didn't even get opposed by a Democrat in 1998 and 2000 and 2022. He didn't get opposed at all. And so I thought, well, it's not a chance to win, but it's a chance to get heard. So I looked into running in the 6th. But it turned out the Democrats did find a candidate in 2004. And I went up to Greensboro, where he's from, and had dinner with him and discussed things with him and decided that he was sufficiently aligned with my views that I didn't want to run against him. But then I noticed the Democrats didn't have anybody in the 8th. They thought they might have, but it turned out the candidate that people thought was a shoo-in had a skeleton in his closet. Related to a fatal hit and run on a pedestrian while intoxicated that he managed to cover up by having local political connections, or at least that was what I heard. In any case, he chose not to run. His daughter ran instead. You can't make this stuff up. And she filed the last day of filing. So it wasn't like I could withdraw. Actually, I could have. But I was in at that point. It was an interesting primary because it was delayed. And filing was accordingly delayed because of, guess what? A redistricting dispute. And so it was a late primary, quite late. It may have even been in June. I can't remember. Anyhow, she got 75% of the Democratic vote, and I got 25. So she trounced me, but all the Democratic faithful considered her the anointed candidate. So that was what happened in 2004. So in 2006, I did it again because there were, in the 8th, the Dems again had a candidate in the 6th. Howard Coble was still in office. I forget exactly when he retired, maybe 2008. Anyhow, entrenched Republican. And in 2006, there were initially the Dems thought they had a centrist with a military record and who would be popular and might have a chance in a red district. His name was Tim Dunn, and he's from Fayetteville. He's still around. And he wouldn't come out against the war. And then he had a challenger, Larry Kissel. And Larry wouldn't come out against the war either. So I decided somebody's got to speak truth to power here. So I got in too. And then, surprise, surprise, a fourth candidate got in. That was current State Representative John Autry from Charlotte. Also anti-war, and coincidentally a cyclist like me also. And Kissel's a cyclist too. So we had 3 cyclists in the race. and Autry and me opposing the war. And then Kissel flip-flopped on the war. He went from saying we should stay the course and stay in Afghanistan to saying, no, Iraq, pardon me. Really, we were in both of them, but it was Iraq that we were debating about at the time. He said, well, we got in a year. We ought to be able to get out in a year. So he went from his previous position to that. And then, after ballots had already been printed, this will have a familiar ring to it if you followed Kennedy. After the ballots had already been printed, Dunn announced that he was withdrawing. But as it happened, his name was still on the ballot. And a lot of overseas voters who voted early voted for Dunn anyway, despite the fact that he had withdrawn. So at that point, the race had gone from 2 candidates who didn't oppose the war to 3 candidates that did oppose the war. So it kind of felt like I moved the needle. Anyway, Kissel won the primary, and in November, he ran against the incumbent Robin Hayes, and Hayes won very narrowly. As I recall, the margin was 327 votes for the entire congressional district. And Kissel demanded a recount, as he is allowed to do, and they recounted 6 of the 12 counties, and it only changed the numbers by about, I think, 3 or 4. And at that point, Kissel said, okay, I concede. So they didn't count the remaining 6. So that was the election in 2006. In 2008, Kissel ran again, and I think he was unopposed. I didn't run. And that time, he got in on Obama's coattails, and he beat Hayes. And he served, I think, 2 terms. Can't remember for sure. Anyway, that's the history of my other 2 candidacies. I certainly learned that the Democratic Party was not a vehicle for people like me, but that was no surprise. I knew that anyway. But in those days, the only 2 parties that were on the ballot most of the time were the Democrats and Republicans. In 2004 and 2008, the Libertarians did end up getting on by petition, but only at the last minute. And they have not had to petition since. In 2008, for the first time, they succeeded in getting 2% for governor with Mike Munger. And ever since then, they have made threshold to stay on. But in any case, in those elections where I was running for Congress, the Libertarians were not on the ballot in 2006, were on in 2004 by the skin of their teeth, but as a newly recognized party, they did not nominate by primary, they nominated by convention. And I did talk to them, and although their chair at the time, Sean Haw, favored having me as their candidate in the 6th, he talked to other members of their executive committee, and I didn't have enough support there. They would have put somebody up against me, and since it was nomination by convention, I would not have prevailed. So that was why I didn't run Libertarian. And at that time, I also had been active in the Green Party, voted for Nader in 1996 when I was living in Wisconsin, 2000 when I was living here, although he wasn't even qualified as a write-in because the person they put in charge of that dropped the ball. But I voted for him anyway. And 2004, I voted Green for Cobb. And Nader ran unaffiliated. Cobb and he were both write-ins. The Greens, until very recently, never did manage to get on by petition. But back then it was much harder to get on by petition. You needed 2% of the vote for president or governor, rather than 0.25% for governor. So that was much, much harder. And the Libertarians were the only party that ever did it. And so going green was not an option. So anyway, more history.
Well, that was a lot of history. I appreciate that. Anyways, we're going to go over some aspects of the We the People Party of North Carolina's platform. And I'll read the policies, and you can respond like why the party supports this policy, if that's cool with you.
Sure, okay.
All right. The first one that I
I
highlight.
should mention I didn't author that, but I pretty much agree with it.
All right. That's pretty good to hear. Anyways, 1, environmental stewardship of our soil, air, and water. This is something that the We the People Party of North Carolina supports as their core values.
Sure, why not? Practically, it's possible to find people in politics who won't lead with that or even emphatically come out in favor of it. But have you ever heard a politician say, "No, I'm not for that"? Hardly anybody will actually come out and say, "No, I want us to mine and pollute and use this planet up absolutely as fast as we can. Let's just go for it." There's probably a few people who actually believe that. They think the end times are at hand and the planet's toast, so never mind, it's going anyway. But I've never heard anybody say that while they're running for office. Have you? I've been an environmentalist for a long time and a political activist for a long time. When I was 18, Vietnam was going on, and this country had a draft. And I applied for and was able to get a conscientious objector classification. That meant that you did 2 years of civilian service contributing to the national health, safety, or interest instead of going into the military. And what I did in my 2 years was investigate ecologically sound lifestyles. This was 1970 to 1972. And I worked in a food co-op, worked in a bicycle shop, and taught people with a free university that we had in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, how to do elementary bicycle repair and maintenance. Took a 3,000-mile bicycle trip, grew a garden, and wrote quarterly reports for my employer. My employer was the Greater Milwaukee Conference on Religion and Urban Affairs. And this is an interesting story, I think. See, I not only was opposed to the war, I was opposed to the draft. And my strategy was stay out of jail, comply with the letter of the law as much as you can, but as much as you have to, but throw as much sand in the gears as you can without getting yourself in legal trouble. So they can find what they'll do. What they did was find 3 jobs for you, mostly in hospitals as an orderly or maintenance person. And you were required to go interview at these, but they couldn't make the employer hire you. So if you wanted to not get hired, you just did things at your job interview that would probably get you not hired. So I strung that out for quite a while, and quite a lot of other people caught on to this too, I surmise. And I was able to just make it very difficult for them to find me a suitable job. Well, but you had to go interview. So the first 3 jobs that they found, I managed to not get hired at any of them. So they, after a while, they sent me 3 more. So I went and interviewed at the Greater Milwaukee Conference on Religion and Urban Affairs. And I walked in, and here's this guy with long hair and wire-rimmed glasses and a walrus mustache sitting behind the desk, and he goes, "Sure, we'll hire you. What do you want to do?" You come up with your own project. You have to fund it yourself. We pay you $1 a year, and you can do just about anything you can think of. Your title is Potential Task Force Area Participant Evaluator. So I was for 2 years a potential task force area participant evaluator for the Greater Milwaukee Conference on Religion and Urban Affairs for $1 a year. Anyway, what I chose, because I already was wise to the wisdom of environmentalism, chose what I mentioned to you, investigating and promoting ecologically sound lifestyle. So I go back that far with it.
That's awesome. Anyways, let's go to the next part of the party's platform. The party also supports access to safe food and healthy public spaces and natural resources.
Yeah, well, healthy food public access to it. And did you read the second part again?
Oh, yeah, sure. Access to safe food and healthy public spaces and natural resources.
Sure. Well, contact with contact with nature not only develops an appreciation for nature, it puts your mind at ease. It's what our species evolved with, and it's what we're naturally comfortable with. And denying people that is part of what makes prison punishment. So, of course, people have a right to that.
All right, let's go to the next one I'm interested in talking about, which is the party also supports halting corporate influence in politics and governance.
Sure. I would even go beyond that. Certainly, I would support a constitutional amendment overturning Citizens United. Corporations may be legal persons, but that's a different use of the term than the people who wrote the U.S. Constitution intended. I think constitutional rights should be for natural persons, not legally created entities that aren't actually people like you and me. So uh, I like the idea of public campaign finance. And I also think we need democracy at the point of production, because that is where the rubber meets the road in any society. It's where the decisions that shape the material realities of people's lives are, for the most part, taken at the point of production. I would favor a co-determination law. You know what a co-determination law is?
I don't.
That's a law that says, what?
Oh, I said I don't know what that
Yes,
is.
no? Okay, a lot of people don't know, but it's a very good idea. Instead of nationalizing everything, you have a law that says in a business that's incorporated and has a board of directors, not only people who put up capital for the business get voting rights to elect the directors, the people who contribute labor get voting rights to elect the board of directors. That's only fair. Having what kind of democracy do you think we'd have if all the votes were for sale and you could have as many as you could buy? I mean, we're too close to that on a de facto level as it is, but that's the way a corporation is run legally. That ain't right. That's not fair. I think the workers, there should be a weighted voting system, and the workers should have 70% of the voting weight, and the investors should have 30%. Of course, those numbers are just what I think. It's possible to use different ones. Germany actually has something like that, except it's toothless. Germany has a co-determination law where if the corporation is really big, if it isn't, the law doesn't apply. The workers elect half of the board of directors, ordinarily 6, and the investors elect 6. But it's toothless because a German corporation has 2 boards of directors, unlike one in this country. They have a supervisory board and a managing board. The managing board handles the day-to-day management of the company. The only concrete power of the supervisory board is that it appoints the managing board. However, in the supervisory board, it's 6 and 6, but they select from their own number a chair, and the chair is required to come from the capital block, not the labor block. And anytime there's a tie vote, the chair can cast a second vote to break the tie. So that basically means that the law only applies to the less powerful of the two boards that has less immediate control of the operations. And it guarantees that anytime there's a clear-cut conflict of interest between labor and capital, capital is bound to prevail. And consequently, that hasn't been very transformative. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the whole concept of a co-determination law is wrong. It's just the particulars of that one that are less than they could be. So I would favor that. I think it's a good idea. I would favor public ownership of a few more things, notably rail infrastructure. Not rail carriers, but rail infrastructure. There is a movement right now called Public Rail Now that grew out of a union federation called Railroad Workers United. And what they favor is putting rail on the same footing as air travel and road travel, where most of the roads are publicly owned, but the trucking companies and private vehicles are privately owned. Most of the airports are publicly owned, and the carriers, the airlines, are privately owned. The idea would be to put rail on a similar footing. I certainly would favor that. I think there's a strong case for at least a public option in banking. I don't see why it's necessary for the banks to all be privatized. Personally, I bank at a credit union, and it's a better deal than commercial banks are, for the most part, although there are some limitations. So I do not favor nationalizing everything. I do not favor prohibiting having your own business or anything like that. I think it's a good idea if businesses have autonomy. It encourages innovation and furthers liberty in general. However, there are certain things that are better done as public sector. In the real world, all economies are mixed. It's just a question of what kind of a mix.
All right, that's actually awesome. All right, the next issue we're going to talk about: ending and preventing wars, redirecting excessive foreign military aid to domestic affairs.
Sure. That's something that most progressives favor, and I certainly do. We waste ridiculous amounts of money on war, and partly it's done just to keep the wheels turning in the domestic economy. It's what is sometimes called military Keynesianism. It's a way of paying people to do stuff that doesn't create a whole lot of surplus consumer goods production that would result in a collapse of demand compared to production. In other words, it's basically it's a boondoggle economically. Why pay people to do nothing when you can pay them to destroy stuff and then rebuild it? It's the ultimate boondoggle in a way. but we shouldn't be destroying stuff. The other reason that the ruling class doesn't like just spending on things that are directly beneficial to the people is that if you put more purchasing power in people's hands and you give them things that help them have more autonomy in their life, that help them stand up to the boss, the ruling class has less control of society. So military Keynesianism is a way of concentrating power and wealth while keeping the wheels turning. So that's why it exists. But that's also why it's bad. Well, I'm against it. I agree with that plank in the platform wholeheartedly. And that was, as I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons that I did support Kennedy. He was at least in favor of getting out of Ukraine. I didn't support his position on Israel and still don't. I thought that was inconsistent. He favored continuing to support Israel, and I think with what Israel's doing right now, I don't think that's defensible. So I differed with Kennedy on that. But the party plank, as stated where you just read it, then sure, definitely support that.
So do I. Anyways, next up, securing our borders while expanding safe legal immigration.
Right. I recently talked to a person that I work with as a volunteer at Down Home, North Carolina, who is an immigrant from Bolivia. And he was for quite a few years an illegal or undocumented immigrant, and eventually got citizenship. And the citizenship process, the naturalization process, is something that people who are born in this country hardly ever get any visibility of and hardly know anything about. But according to my friend, it was extremely difficult, took years, involved hiring lawyers, and it's prohibitively difficult for anybody who doesn't have access to those resources and doesn't have money. So that's why so many people do it unlawfully. Meanwhile, half the population who are born here don't know any civics at all. So the immigration process needs to be streamlined. And at the same time, it has to be orderly and legal. But it has to be streamlined enough so that people practically can do it legally. So the what's needed can be summed up as strong walls and wide gates. That's how some people put it. And I think that's good.
That's good to hear. All right, next up is restoring quality of life to the middle class, marginalized communities, and our veterans.
Yeah. Well, that's moving wealth and power downward, basically. So that's the opposite of concentrating wealth and power. And as a self-described deconcentrationist, that's what I'm about.
All right, that was pretty quick. Next up, prison reform and the implementation of healing rehabilitative farming programs.
That's a good thing. And we actually have what many people call a prison industrial complex in this country. It's become a backdoor way of restoring slavery, because what happens is you end up with, in many cases, racist disparities in law enforcement, particularly against victimless crimes like smoking pot. And you end up with a large incarcerated population who are then worked pretty much as slaves. They get paid little or nothing, but they get housed, they get confined in their housing, and they get to do things for the corporate sector. So it basically becomes a way of reintroducing something akin to chattel slavery. So what we ought to do is, first of all, quit locking people up for victimless crimes in the first place, and also encourage rehabilitation. For a time I worked, it was just over 4 years, in a correctional halfway house run by a nonprofit organization. And while it wasn't ideal, it was a way of addressing the problem of people being released from incarceration and just dumped out on the street with no resources and no way to get back into the legal economy, and a black mark because of their conviction and their sentence. So they end up with a high degree of recidivism. They end up having no way to transition back to the legal economy, and the legal economy in many cases is so crooked and discriminatory anyway, they end up pursuing illegal sources of income and power, and they get put back in again. In fact, in some cases, especially with petty property crime, what happens is this happens a lot with bicycle theft, actually, and a lot of other property theft. The police will do a raid, find stolen property, arrest the people who have the stolen property. They get convicted. They get to do a little bit of time, or they get probation, and they get put back out. But the property they stole doesn't go back to its original owners in most cases. It goes to a police lockup, where it sits for a time if it's not claimed, and the original owners don't even know where to find the lockup, and once a year they sell that stuff at auction and fund the police department. So you've got the criminals and the police washing each other's hands. So that happens too. But anyway, certainly in many cases, rehabilitative programs, in addition to or instead of incarceration, are a good way to go.
All right, that's pretty awesome. All right, next up, the party supports medical freedom, bodily autonomy, and solving our chronic disease epidemic.
Yes, I do think that Kennedy needs to follow through on his promise of investigating causes of critical diseases. Some of them are already known. They have to do with lifestyle and diet. And it may be that vaccine injuries are a factor as well, but certainly investigation of those things is important, especially in view of the fact that we have a country where all kinds of food additives and poisons that are illegal in most of the developed world are allowed here. And we also have an inordinate incidence of chronic disease. So some of the ways to address this are already known, and more should be investigated. And as for bodily autonomy, I'm certainly in favor of that, particularly with respect to reproductive rights. I think abortion should be, as Clinton put it, safe, legal, and rare. So I'm the beneficiary of free reproductive care myself. I got a vasectomy when I was 28, and it was paid for because I was unemployed and had a Spanish surname. Can you beat that? And that sort of care should be available to anybody. It's not a good thing to prohibit it. What happens, as with prohibition of anything that a lot of people want, is that it gets driven underground, and it gets done by who knows what standards, by who knows what people. It's not a good thing. So safe, legal, and rare.
All right. I guess the last policy that I'm going to go over for this episode is the party supports equitable political participation, including fair ballot access and upholding of human rights.
Certainly. I would actually favor there are a lot of reforms that I would like to see. I would like ideally something like they have in the Netherlands with their proportional representation system, where a group can form relatively easy, call itself a party, or maybe not, but it's effectively a party. And what the party does is the party is a membership organization, unlike what we have now, where the only thing that defines you as a party member is your voter registration, and they can't charge dues, they can't control their own membership. It should be easy to start a party, but it should be easy for the party to define what its candidates stand for. What they do in the Netherlands is the party puts up a list of candidates, and they have an at-large legislature. The whole country votes for the whole legislature, and you vote for the party. You don't vote for the individual candidates. The party has a list, and they list their nominees in order of preference. And they get seats in proportion to their share of the vote, starting at the top of the list and working down. And that, I think, is a reasonable system. It would require a constitutional change to implement that in this country. But I would favor that. I certainly don't favor, obviously, major party manipulation of ballot access laws to entrench themselves in power. And we certainly see that all the time. North Carolina used to be worse. There has been some progress made nationwide. It's an ongoing tug of war where in some places at some times progress gets rolled back. If you want to keep up with that stuff, I don't know if you subscribe to Ballot Access News, but they cover those struggles and battles and wins and losses once a month, and have a website too if you want more current information. I've been a subscriber to that since, 40 years ago, I think.
That's awesome. And yes, I actually do read some ballot access news articles from time to time. And yeah, we really need more representation for fair ballot access, especially for third parties, where after everything that has been going on, third parties are still having to fight now with the RRC meeting that's coming up on August 28th and upcoming rule petition changes that are going on. It's crazy.
Yeah, but the far as I understand, the current proposal for these are actually administrative proposals at the Board of Elections. That's part of the way laws get made. It's not all just statutes. It's administrative decisions at different appointed boards. In this case, the Board of Elections, State Board of Elections. What they want to do is have petitioners' names on the petitions now, the circulators' names, which makes things a little bit more difficult. Uh, they may very well implement that. A lot of states do that anyway, uh, so it's not something that's unprecedented and outrageous. But it's not something I would favor. I don't think there's anything wrong with the system we had already. But uh, in any case, that's being talked about right now. And I think there's a public comment period open now, isn't there? I think
For the
there is.
RRC, oh yeah, for the I think yeah, I believe it for the RRC agenda on like August 28th. There's gonna be like a public hearing for people to like come and talk about if there's any rules, if there's any like aspects of some of the rules for this one, along with a bunch of other ones on where like people could speak out in favor or against stuff on like August 28th. And if you want to,
Please continue.
oh yeah, and if you and I believe that if you want to like file a like an objection to some rule before then, I believe you have to like send like some sort of email about which sections you oppose, and if you can get like 10 people to oppose like a certain rule, then they can put that up for like legislative review in hopes of getting it rejected.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is following on the newly constituted board, which has, I think, what, 2 members that were on before and 3 new ones. I think that's right. And it now has a 3-2 Republican majority, whereas previously it had a 3-2 Democratic majority. And we'll see. There's a lot there, and I probably should be more conversant with it than I am. Anyway.
And like I said before, I'll make sure to send you and all the other third parties any more information, just in case like there's some updates that someone like the Constitution Party that has been very focused on this, just in case like there's like any updates that I need to inform you, and just to make sure that we're all in this together, because I believe in the third party movement.
Yeah. Well, by all means, send me stuff like that. I'm always interested.
So with that being said, I think I already have a good feeling of how the party's doing. I've been told by Tony Nardo, and I've actually gotten into contact with the National We the People Party that although the party's inactive, the party some members of the party have met up like a few months ago, and I've gotten an email from the National Party a little while back saying that the party is like currently rebuilding, even though it's inactive. So there's like a bit of that going on.
Yeah, there is some interest in other states, I'm told, in starting this. And there actually were We the People parties in 2 or 3 other states. Florida, I think, and not sure, maybe one other, but maybe Delaware. I forget. Delaware is fairly easy. You only need something like 700 registrations. And also California, I'm trying to think. Uh, no, I don't think they got one in California. What happened in California was that they started to collect registrations. California is weird. You don't get petition signatures, you have to get registrations. There's also a petition option, but the signature requirement is so high that nobody ever goes that way. What you do is get people to register as members of the party, and that's what gets it recognition. So they were pursuing that for We the People in California, but then the American Independent Party, which was already recognized in California, decided to nominate Kennedy. And consequently, it wasn't necessary to pursue the We the People option anymore in California. So interestingly, actually, Kennedy could have appeared on two ballot lines if he had wanted, because California allows that. That's called fusion. California allows that for the presidential race only. But since he was already on with the American Independent Party, there wasn't much advantage in going to the trouble, because you need quite a few registrations. The advantage is, and this is why they have so many parties recognized in California, once you're on, it's not like North Carolina, where if you don't make a certain threshold in the next election, you're off again. In California, if you retain a threshold number of registrations, and I bet they don't check real close, you just stay on. But except for the presidency, it doesn't matter anymore in California because they have the top two primary system. Everybody's in one primary. There are no party primaries, and whatever two get the most votes advance to the general election. And they do that for everything except the presidency. So under that system, party nominations don't really happen. You can have any number of people. They do have voter registration by party, but they don't have any party primaries except for president anymore. So California is an oddball case.
Yep, it sure is. Anyways, I realize that the We the People Party of North Carolina is like the only one out of like the main 7 that were like protesting last year on North Carolina's ballot BS that doesn't have a YouTube channel. So even though the party's inactive right now, will the We the People Party of North Carolina create a YouTube channel?
I haven't even checked. Did you see one?
No, I have not.
No,
there is not one.
No, well, it's something we could do if we really wanted to pursue it. But to my knowledge, we haven't. The Libertarians certainly have one.
Yeah,
I'm subscribed to that one.
Yeah, so am I. I know the Libertarians have one, the Greens have one, the Constitution Party has one, the Veterans Party has one, Ford has one, Justice for All I know has one. I believe the Reform Party also has one, but they don't have any videos, I believe. And, yeah.
Well, that's a good way to do things. Where do you put these podcasts? Do you have a YouTube channel, or
yes.
do you use another platform?
Oh yeah, I use YouTube, and at the end of this interview, I'll send you the link to my YouTube channel.
Good.
So
I'll subscribe.
Awesome. That would be really appreciated. With that being said, is there anything else you want to talk about?
We've been on for a little over an hour, so
I guess that's it.
not that readily comes to mind. One reform that interests me. Do you know what limited voting is?
I don't.
That's where, when there's more than one seat open in a race, you cannot vote for as many candidates as there are seats. You can vote for either just one or some number that's less than the total number being elected. And this is something. This plus multi-member districts is, or at-large elections in the case of a county, perhaps, is a way of getting more diversity in representation. Because what tends to happen when you have plurality to win and you can vote for as many candidates as there are seats, even a narrow numerical edge gives a party almost total control. For example, in Cabarrus County, which is just south of me, I live in Rowan County, but as I may have mentioned, about a third of a mile from the county line. In Cabarrus County, the voter registration is around 37.5% unaffiliated, 33 or 4% Republican, and about 28% Democratic. So the registered Republicans have about a 6-5 edge over registered Democrats. It's pretty close. And no non-Republican has won a partisan race in Cabarrus County for 30 years. So there are some counties, I think there are 3 in North Carolina, that do have limited voting. And all 3 of them have it as a result of what are called consent decrees that result when the county gets sued by people who are disadvantaged by the system they're using. In this case, this happened back in the 90s. It happened, these were suits brought by the NAACP with assistance from the American Civil Liberties Union. And the limited voting was designed to give Black folks more representation in the county commission. And the counties agreed to that, and that's how that came about. In any case, it isn't a perfect solution, and in fact, there are no perfect solutions in election systems. But that's an interesting possibility, as opposed to what is sometimes called affirmative districting, which is where the district lines are drawn and you have district elections that are intended to allow racial minorities or other maybe philosophical minorities to have some representation in the government rather than being completely excluded. It's an interesting thing. One other interesting system that's used is where you want to make sure that different geographical areas, which can also be associated with race or ethnicity, if the population's distributed that way, you can have voting at large, but candidate eligibility by district. The Rowan Salisbury School Board is elected that way. They have 7 districts. You've got to live in that district to be a candidate. But everybody in the county votes for all the candidates. The voting is at large, but candidate eligibility is by district. The Concord City Council is also that way. They have 7 districts, and or is it 6? One of the two. And the candidate has to live in that district. And those are nonpartisan elections. So there are no party nominees, but the candidate only gets elected to a particular seat. And one of the advantages of that is that if you have districts and district voting, in order to have roughly equal representation, the districts have to be apportioned and drawn to have about the same population. But if you have district candidate eligibility but at-large voting, that requirement goes away. So you don't have constant redistricting battles every time you get a census. Anyway, just a few interesting things to cogitate about. I think most people don't know about or don't think very much about.
All right. I want to say. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. If you got anything else.
We've gone on over an hour. I don't know if you try to limit your podcasts to an hour, do you?
Oh, no. Don't worry about that. Feel free to finish what you need to say.
Okay. Well, there's one other interesting thing that's going on. The Republicans are trying to partisanize as many elections as they possibly can throughout the state, local, county, and municipal elections. Right now, I'm pretty sure the only partisan city council races are in Raleigh and Charlotte. But there's a move underway to try to partisanize them in Cabarrus County. And they already did pass a local act partisanizing the school board in Cabarrus County, which was previously nonpartisan. I'm very much in favor of more nonpartisan elections, not fewer. But I mentioned how the Republican Party, even though it has a narrow numerical edge, is able to completely dominate the county commission. And the school board is going to be that way too. And they also did that in Rowan. So Rowan is a little different from the Concord City Council, where you have nonpartisan and candidate eligibility by district. In Rowan, we now have partisan elections, so there will be primaries by district with at-large voting, and that's going to be interesting. Next year will be the first year that we'll see that in my county. But there is a bill pending in the legislature right now. It's H-271. It's currently sitting in the Rules Committee in the Senate. It would call for referenda in each of the 4 municipalities that are entirely in Cabarrus County, referenda on whether their municipal elections should be made partisan. There are 4 communities, it's Concord, Harrisburg, Midland, and Mount Pleasant, that are affected by this. Right now, it's sitting in the Rules Committee, and a lot of bills get sent to the Rules Committee and not acted on, and they just die there. And most of us are hoping that's what happens. The legislature doesn't come back into session until the 26th. And at that point, it's too late to call for referenda. So we know we're not going to have those referenda in Cabarrus County. However, they could just partisanize those elections anyway, just like they did with the school board. There's no requirement to have the referenda. They just like the optics of having it win by referendum. They can't be accused of ramming it down people's throats quite so easily. So this is another interesting election science issue that's currently getting talked about where I live. The organization that I work with down home North Carolina has come out opposing the referenda if we have them, and opposing partisanization of local elections in general. Anyway, that's voting systems and ballot access issues.
All right. With that being said, I just want to thank Mark Ortiz for being on my show today. I'll definitely send the links to
Thank you
all.
for having me.
You're welcome. I'll definitely send in the links to all the We the People Party of North Carolina social media in case you want to check it out. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please hit the like button below. Please hit share, subscribe. Feel free to comment if you need to, and hit the notification bell if you are new. And with that being said, I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you all.